russosbrand.com, where the pros are the pros. Lions, Tigers, Bears, and head.
Well, last week we talked about Dax Harwood of FTR. He's got a podcast now. His comments that he wished that CM Punk and the Elite would just work together, get on the same page for the good of the company, for the good of the wrestling business. Well, some propaganda has now made its way to Meltzer about this podcast, as Meltzer is saying that people backstage at AEW were not happy with Harwood and what he said on that episode. So who knows who told Meltzer that, but it seems like there are, whoever backstage didn't like Punk is probably giving their message to Meltzer. Now, we're not happy with Harwood saying these things. Conrad Thompson even said on one of his shows, it's kind of an unspoken rule that when he does shows with Tony Schiavone and Bruce Pritchard, they don't talk about their current jobs and their current things. Right. And he was very surprised.
Does that include Jeff Angle? Does that include Jeff Jarrett shooting an angle on the Conrad show?
That's probably, that's probably the difference. That's probably the difference because that's an angle. Because that's an angle. Is actually, I think it was on the show with Jarrett that he said this. Yeah, okay. And he said, Conrad, very experienced. He was surprised that podcast was out there. And in his opinion, AEW is going to make him stop doing it soon, because he's talking about things like that. He did a show recently about them not being booked on the Full Gear card, and he thought they were going to wrestle the Young Bucks and why he didn't. But apparently people are telling Meltzer at AEW that they're not happy with him.
I don't understand that, Alan. And this is why, Al, I am not affiliated with any, wrestling company. Don't want to be affiliated, will never be affiliated again, because I have the freedom to come on here. I can talk about whatever the frig I want. Right. I don't get these guys I honestly don't like, Bruce doing a podcast, Tony Schiavone doing a podcast, people in the business that are still doing a podcast. To me, the draw is, Al, they're working in the business like that. That's the draw. Tony's working for AEW. He knows what's going on. Right. But how the heck can you do a podcast while you're actively working for a company? And, oh, by the way, we can't talk about anything that we're doing. I just don't think you should mix the two.
I don't think Bruce, and let's face it, Bruce is a master.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Unquestionably. I mean, let's acknowledge, and Bruce has got how much experience. Bruce Pritchard's been around since Paul Bosch, since he was a teenager. Yeah. So not Paul Bosch, but since Bruce was a teenager, with Paul Bosch in the office. So Bruce is very adept at navigating whatever waters, he's put in. And I think, Bruce and Conrad were the ones that first came up with this concept, which was, Bruce doesn't talk about any modern day or present topics. At least he didn't. I haven't listened or into any of the podcasts in ages. So I can't say for sure that he does now, but I know that back in the day, all he talked about was his experiences with certain events in WWE, and that he was a part of his experiences in WWF, WWE, WrestleMania, different characters, how they were developed, his insights. And I think, unless it's changed, Schiavone is in much the same role with that concept of doing a podcast and relating tales from back in the day of WCW and NWA, I think. I don't know. And in that case, I can see and understand how a modern, a persona, a personality who is involved directly with a company today can do a podcast that's entertaining and interesting, because they're not covering present day events, and they're not positing, they're not giving their opinions on those events as they relate to what's occurring right now in real time.
I understand. Al, I totally get that. But when you're doing a show with a Bruce, and when you're doing a show with the Tony Schiavone, and something happens in the company they're working for, and you got the elephant in the room and the guy that come on, man, either work in the wrestling business or do a podcast. That's just my point of view. That's all.
I
I mean, you're not in the wrestling business. Nobody knows who OVW is, even though you got 80,000 countries and 250 billion people watching the show. So Al, technically,
I'm not in the wrestling business. I'm in the podcast business.
Yeah, technically, you're not in the wrestling. OVW. If Meltzer doesn't report on OVW, it doesn't exist, Al.
Nope.
Al, you had a cross paths. I mean, you were never at WCW. But you had to work with Tony at some point, no?
Oh, yeah.
At WWE?
No, not in WWE.
I think I might have
ran into him, and I know I did run into him a couple times. I worked with WCW in the 80s when Ole and, he got the Murdochs to run Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and parts of West Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania. I worked, we'd do the house shows, they'd help to cut costs. They'd bring in local guys to work the underneath card.
Yeah.
And then, I met Tony when I went down for the one dark match when Bischoff was in charge and, briefly interacted with him. And then I think maybe once or twice I've met him and talked to him at conventions. And then, when I went for a visit, which was very nice, and I think Tony's a great guy, He's a great resource. I think that Tony, again, has a tremendous amount of knowledge about the wrestling business from being, not actually a performer, but on an outside viewpoint from a commentating position. He understands what it is we're selling, how we should sell it, etc., and is a great resource as far as, information and experience.
I think in this situation, because I mean, Al's right. Everybody in the wrestling business knows like Bruce is a freaking master. And I got to tell you something too with Bruce. There's got to be a little bit of concern over job security. Obviously, when Vince was there, Bruce ain't going to say nothing about anything on the podcast. Now with Triple H in charge, and you got to remember, the history, Stephanie fired Bruce. So he look at this.
He doesn't. I'm not talking about that. I'm out of here.
Unbelievable.
It's
unbelievable. I'm trying to do a show.
And these people all know. They all know because I've told everybody. Do not.
Obviously, you didn't tell the person who just called.
What's that?
Obviously, you didn't tell the person who just called.
I told that one a lot. Yeah.
All right. My point is, Bruce is a master of this. Yeah. He will not say a word for a million reasons. I think Tony.
But I think like to my point, I think the format of both those shows allows them not to have to. People aren't turning on those shows. They're not coming to that podcast to hear about current events. They're coming to that show because the format's not about current events. It is about previous experiences. Whereas this podcast clearly is about current events of that particular week.
I just think it's going to be, I knowing Tony and knowing Bruce, I think it's a little bit more difficult for Tony to be tight-lipped. I think Tony is opinionated and, likes to speak his mind. So that's why, I could see, stuff slipping through the cracks with and Tony's not worried about the other Tony firing him because he says that ain't going to happen,
But I think so far, we've not heard of anything as, in that regards. And I know that, I remember when we, at Impact, we had, where we had to go and keep reminding the talent, hey, don't stooge stuff off to, the internet, because it ruins things. And remember we had that leak. And I know when I came to visit for AEW, they also had posts, they had. You want
to hear a great story, Al? You will pop you. So Al, there's a leak. There's a mole at TNA. So Dixie calls a meeting. She is pissed off, bro, because all this top secret information is getting out there. Bro, I am not shitting you. And you will know when I tell you this, you will say, yeah, that happened. That's the wrestling business. Bro, she calls us all in this meeting. She is hot. She is yelling, ranting, and raving. I know one of you in here, she's hot. She goes, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Bro, her exact words, Al. I'm going to put out a bounty. if anybody has any information and gives me any information on the mole, I will write them a check. And bro, she used the word bounty. She putting a bounty on the head of the mole now. A bounty, bro.
I remember actually hearing about this.
That's the truth. And I almost turned you in just to make a couple bucks. How can you believe that? She was dead serious. And Jeff, everybody in that room, like we're from the wrestling business. So the minute she throws bounty out there.
You know that the minute you're thinking, well, I'll just stooge this guy off over here. I'll make some money.
It was absolutely tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. Yes. All right.
I actually heard about that because it got leaked out.
That was
with what you just said about being in the business and then doing a podcast and ignoring everything current that's happening. Well, here's Harwood doing the complete opposite. He is, and he's not only he's not a backstage worker, he's an on-air talent. So he's doing this podcast, he's telling it like it is, and people are getting upset with him enough to tell Meltzer this. So, I mean, should he just not have started this? But is this a bad idea on his part?
You know what's an absolute joke? You know what's an absolute joke that I hate about this business, and I think you'll agree with me on this. Okay, bro. So there's a lot of guys backstage in the VIP camp that aren't happy with Dax Harwood, and now Meltz is reporting this. Al, how many guys do you think went directly up to Dax and said, "Hey, bro, you know that's what I hate about the freaking business, man. You got a problem with what the guy said? Go up to him and tell him you got a problem and have a conversation."
And that's not just the wrestling business. Let's face it, that's human nature. I mean,
that's true, Al.
People avoid conflict by creating conflict, by avoiding conflict all the time. You know what I mean? They won't. People don't know how to. It's gotten worse now. Why? I mean, we can all speculate as to why, but people are becoming even more socially inept in understanding human relations and how to directly interact with another human being to resolve issues. I mean, it's becoming more and more of a problem. It's always been a problem in wrestling because always. Guys always are. They're always shooting angles. And so that people understand the term of shooting an angle, which is you never go straight on. You always are trying to find a way to slide in from behind the truth a little bit of the lie, so that you're always coming in at an angle. That was why it was called shooting an angle, and instead of being straight up. And guys are always doing that. They're always trying to manipulate the locker room. They're trying to manipulate their spot. They're trying to manipulate each other. And are never just going to come in and directly confront anybody, and you're right. I speculation, we don't know, but because we weren't there, but yeah, it's pretty safe to assume that the people that went to Meltzer and complained are the people that never mentioned anything to Dax about not doing this or just advising him. If I were there, I'd be like, hey, I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea. You're an on-air personality here as a talent, and now you're divulging backstage things that are ruining the illusion of you being an on-air talent, and I don't think that's going to be conducive to doing business. Now granted, that comes back to, but now you can't knock Dax for having a podcast when your boss is holding a scrum doing exactly the same thing.
There you go. You're right. Yep.
You've got to make a choice. You've got to make a decision. Look, you can't complain that, the same with this TNA thing. We were talking about the mole, and Dixie can't complain about it when she was doing it herself. She was.
She was
in communication with Meltzer. She was in communication with Wade Keller.
Absolutely.
So you can't. It has to start at the top, and that person at the top has to go, look, we all have to agree. Everything we do stays in house, and we don't sit there and do it out. Even if you have a problem with somebody, we deal with it in house. We deal with it amongst each other. We don't try to further our agenda by going to an outside source so that they can now socially help to leverage what you're trying to do here backstage.